All right, let's just dive right into this. I want you to imagine just for a second the highly structured, super systematic day of an everyday warehouse worker. Now, imagine that exact same person taking the strict, rigid rules of their day job, mixing them up with the mind-bending concepts of quantum physics, and then using that completely unique framework to somehow decode the beautiful, messy chaos of human consciousness. Pretty wild, right? Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating set of personal journal entries. Honestly, they read like this brilliant outsider's survival guide to the human mind. Let's get into it.
Listen to this. The 10-second gap is the zone we tread to master mind and brain sync. Beware of all ye who enter. Just let that sink in for a moment. We're stepping right into a raw, deeply personal theory of mind here. You know, this isn't some polished psychology textbook. It's a real, lived attempt to literally wrangle human emotion into something measurable.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll meet our warehouse philosopher. Then we'll look at mastering the 10-second gap, followed by the mechanics of cognitive dissonance. After that, we'll decode some of their specific language, like parathoughts and perceptual pings, before we scale all the way up to the quantum collapse of emotion. And finally, we'll end by finding the fixed point.
Okay, part 1, the warehouse philosopher.
Now, before we get into the massive cosmic leaps this author takes, we've got to ground ourselves in their actual, tangible daily reality. Straight from their own notes, we get this strict, almost mundane inventory of their day-to-day. We're talking an NVQ2 in warehousing, stock rotation, decanting mixed pallets, and operating these fully automated multi-level complex systems. Right? It's an environment where absolutely everything has a specific place, a designated code, and a totally predictable path. It is a highly, highly organized framework.
And that right there brings us to the core tension of this entire explainer. Because the author is attempting this massive, almost impossible cognitive feat. They're trying to take the predictable, systematic, totally rule-based logic of a warehouse and somehow force it over the chaotic, unpredictable, raw intensity of their internal emotional life. Literally, they are trying to barcode their feelings.
And they're actually super explicit about how they pull this off. In the journal, the author talks about having a bored mind that's constantly running what they call background simulations. Basically, they're actively adapting and integrating these rigid workplace principles into their household and emotional life in real time. They even call it a one-structure perception.
Which brings us to part 2, mastering the 10-second gap.
Let's look at their first really intense concept about controlling time and mental synchronicity. They've mapped out a 10-second gap. The theory here is that there's this absolutely crucial 10-second window where your mind and your brain have to sync up before you react to anything, and the author issues this really stark warning against acting with haste inside this zone. Like if you rush it, if you don't give your logical brain that full 10 seconds to catch up with your emotional mind, it leads to some really dangerous sticky perceptions.
Moving on to part 3. The mechanics of cognitive dissonance.
So what happens if that 10-second gap fails? Well, the author has invented these incredibly specific psychological tools to process the fallout, the conflict, the regret, the relationship struggles. And the visual contrast in their notes is just striking. On one hand, you have a meticulously structured mind map, perfectly breaking down skills like body language and social management into past, present, and future. But then, right alongside it, you have this chaotic, heavily scribbled over entry just packed with crossed out words and raw frustration over past arguments. It perfectly, beautifully captures that intense battle between wanting logical structure and dealing with raw emotion. To survive that battle, they developed something they call death work. Now, I know it sounds super dark, but honestly, it's a pretty radical coping mechanism. In their notes, death work is defined as this highly intentional process of separating from personal, emotional needs based purely on facts. Essentially, it lets the author reach a totally self-aware point of action that is completely free from the emotional baggage of the past.
And it doesn't stop there. Get a load of this quote. "Since I'm not a mind reader, I use the skill cognitive dissonance." Now, usually in mainstream psychology, cognitive dissonance is this really uncomfortable state of mental contradiction, right? But here, the author is actively using it as a deliberate skill. They're intentionally forcing a disconnect so they can step completely outside of an argument and just view it as a neutral observer. Kind of a game changer when you think about it. Which naturally leads us to this utterly charming journal entry about the moose blind theory. So the author realizes they often talk to themselves in the mirror as two totally separate personalities. Why? Well, they noted that for the longest time, they'd stare into the mirrors searching for answers, only to finally realize the answer was already inside them the whole time. So playing two personalities just became this structured way to basically interview their own subconscious. I love that.
Okay, part 4, parathoughts and perceptual pings.
As we dig deeper, you start to see that the author has literally created their own specific vocabulary for human intuition and everyday assumptions. First up is the parathought. This is an internally generated narrative, and the author gives this incredibly relatable example. Their partner takes a taxi alone, and instead of just accepting that fact, the author's mind completely spins up this parathought about why she might be leaving, focusing on the distance and isolation, building a whole elaborate story without a single shred of factual confirmation. I mean, we all do this, right? But the author has literally categorized it like it's a warehouse inventory error.
Next is the perceptual filter ping. This is that sudden, intuitive little alert you get when an expected pattern is just missing. For instance, the author writes about watching a TV show with their partner, a show they've been watching for over a year. Usually, whenever a cheating storyline pops up, the partner makes a very specific comment. But one day, the comment just isn't there. Ping! The author's internal system flags that missing data point immediately as a potential shift in reality.
Now, taking a quick breather from all these heavy psychological theories, I have a wonderfully bizarre question for you. What do double-jointed thumbs have to do with pushing chaotic ideas out into the world?
Well, according to the author's delightfully quirky thumb theory, quite a bit. They actually wrote down an observation that people whose thumbs bend backward are somehow more likely to push weird thoughts and ideas out into the universe. It's joyful, it's definitely a little bizarre, but it so perfectly illustrates the relentless, constant search for physical, tangible markers to explain abstract psychological traits. All right, part 5, the quantum collapse of emotion.
Now we're going to escalate this explanation to the author's highest level, most profound philosophical leaps about the universe itself. The author starts wildly cross-referencing entirely different disciplines to map out human relationships. Like math and science deal with invisible figures that don't mix, the law dictates that two contradictory things cannot run together, but quantum mechanics, that is where they find peace. They use the concept of waveforms collapsing together to create form as this incredibly beautiful metaphor for how chaotic, drastically different individuals can somehow collide to create one continuous, shared reality together.
And to map out this chaotic reality, they literally leave no stone unturned. I mean, their notes pull from a dizzying mix of sources. They reference childhood ADHD and how the brain fights to maintain state. They hypothesize about the singularity, guessing that downloading a human brain into a computer would create a structure we couldn't possibly understand. They even do this deep analytical breakdown of the lyrics to the Wizard of Oz song, If I Only Had a Brain. It's just this beautiful, almost desperate scramble to use absolutely every cultural and scientific tool they can get their hands on to make sense of what they're feeling.
Finally, part 6, finding the fixed point.
After all the background simulations, the complex relationship mappings, the quantum theories, this incredible journey of the mind comes to a really grounding, highly emotional conclusion. I actually want to read this directly from the author's notes, exact spelling and all, because it is just so raw and powerful. Life is chaos. Shit happens. Don't try control or change. Just find fixed point. We'll be fine. Think about that. After pages and pages of trying to systematically categorize every single emotion, like pallets in a warehouse, the author finally accepts the totally unpredictable coin flip of existence. You can't control the chaos. You can only find what grounds you.
Which really leaves us with a profound final takeaway from our warehouse philosopher. They built this massive, complex intellectual system just to realize that sometimes you literally just have to let go. So I'm going to turn this back to you. In the completely chaotic, unpredictable simulation of your own life, what is your fixed point? Think about that for a bit. We'll catch you in the next explainer.